Hey everyone, Demon Knight here. This video will serve as an introduction to the God Eater series, either for people that come from my Borderlands videos or people that found the videos simply by chance. As I mentioned in my channel update video, I plan on making some guides about it, but more about that at the end of the video. Now there are 3 main games in this series, being God Eater Resurrection, God Eater 2 Rage Burst and God Eater 3. I'm not gonna go over things like story and such, just gameplay, but basically it's about biologically enhanced superhumans fighting giant monsters called Aragami that have overrun the world. God Eater is very similar to games like Monster Hunter, Tukiden or Dauntless. Every enemy is a boss fight and it's all about knowing the enemy's attacks and positioning yourself properly to hit specific body parts. There's a variety of different weapons, both melee and ranged, though personally I exclusively play melee. Every melee weapon has a different moveset with various different combos and special attacks, and mastering a weapon is key to being efficient in combat. For example, this is the Buster Blade, which is a slow and heavy weapon that can be charged up to deal massive damage in a single hit. On the opposite side of things, there's the Short Blade, which is a small but fast weapon that specializes in mobility, both on the ground and in the air. Guns also have special actions, but they don't have movesets like that. Instead you can use different types of ammo and even design custom bullets for them, which can do all sorts of crazy things. Guns consume Oracle Points, in short OP, which is the green bar you see between health and stamina, and it can be refilled by hitting enemies with melee attacks. There's also various other factors that play into combat, like damage types, elemental damage, enemy states, hit zone values and so on. For example, here's a hit zone table of an Aragami called Barbarius, which lists the defense value of every body part in percentages. Here you can see that if you use, for example, a melee weapon that deals pierce damage, you'd want to attack its head to deal the most damage. You'd also want to use spark elemental damage, since that is its weakness, while it's resistant to freeze. And as you can see, some body parts of Aragami can be broken by dealing enough damage to them, which typically lowers their defense. Furthermore, enemies can get enraged, which is a status that lasts for a certain amount of time and can change defense values as well. You take on missions to hunt down Aragami, which have a time limit. You can either go solo, co-op or bring along NPC companions, similar to Palicos from Monster Hunter, just not nearly as annoying. The games aren't very challenging while you proceed through the stories, but the difficulty picks up in endgame content. In the first 2 games there's also a difficulty adjustment called Perilous Challenge that you can apply to missions, which goes up to +99. It's comparable to overpower levels from Borderlands 2, there's no reward for doing it aside from some cosmetics in the second game, otherwise it's just for fun. Slayed enemies give you materials which you can use to craft and upgrade your gear. Breaking body parts, aside from knocking enemies down, will also grant you bonus rewards. As I've already mentioned, there are melee weapons and guns you can craft, but in addition to that there are shields which also function like armor. Then there are several types of equipable upgrades as well. In the first 2 games there are 6 melee weapons and 4 guns, while the third game added 2 more melee weapons and 1 gun, though it also removed 1 gun type. There are also 3 different types of shields, which differ in terms of stats and speed. There aren't any iframes in God Eater, not by default at least, so the only way to avoid damage is to block it with a shield or to avoid an attack altogether by positioning yourself accordingly. Speaking of blocking, there is a mechanic called Just Guard, which is a perfectly timed guard that nullifies all damage and costs no stamina, so that's kind of an alternative to iframes. Sadly, it's one of the mechanics that are broken on the PC versions of Resurrection and Rage Burst. The window for a Just Guard is halved here due to the 60 FPS ports of the games, while that isn't the case for the console versions which play at 30 FPS. Now, one of the main aspects of God Eater gameplay is Devouring. These special attacks you see here that manifest giant maws are called Devour attacks. You take a bite out of an enemy and that puts you into burst mode. It's the gauge you see at the bottom. It constantly drains and you want to keep it active at all times by performing more Devour attacks. While it's active, you gain various bonuses like a damage buff, decreased stamina consumption, higher defense and more. There are 3 levels of burst mode, and at higher levels the bonuses increase further. Between the 3 games, each has different, let's call them interchangeable movesets. A bit like switch skills in Monster Hunter Rise if you're familiar. In God Eater Resurrection you have access to Predator styles, which are Devour attacks. You can equip 5 different Predator styles, one for each type of Devour attack, and each will grant a buff once you successfully attacked an enemy with it. These buffs are temporary though, and will at latest expire once you run out of burst mode, so you want to stack them early on and then try to permanently stay in burst for the duration of the fight. In God Eater 2 Rage Burst there are no Predator styles, you just have the most basic of Devour attacks. Instead, Blood Arts exist, which alter specific attacks of your melee weapons, like for example a Buster Blade's charge attack. However, you can only equip one at a time. Blood Arts can also be leveled up, which you do by performing the attack associated with the Blood Art. In God Eater 3, this system has been expanded on in the form of Burst Arts. Again, they alter specific attacks of a weapon type, but this time you can equip 3 at a time. One for ground attacks, one for aerial attacks and one for step attacks. As for the differences between the games, Resurrection and Rage Burst are pretty similar to each other, while 3 changed a couple of things. It's a bit more fast paced with higher mobility, and it also added new types of Aragami. In general, Aragami are divided into 3 categories: small, medium and large. Small Aragami are basically trash mobs. They die in a few hits and pose no real threat unless they come in packs or accompany a big Aragami. Medium Aragami are actual proper enemies with different hit zones, rage states and so on, but normally they're relatively easy to deal with. Finally, large Aragami are the real deal and put up a fight. But what's new in God Eater 3 are Ashborn Aragami, which could be classified above large Aragami. Ashborn can perform Devour attacks and enter burst mode themselves, adding a new aspect to combat and likely being the reason why the mobility was increased. During burst mode they gain new moves, deal more damage, have changed defense values and sometimes even assume new stances or morph their bodies. And that's pretty much all. Of course, this was just a broad overview to give you an idea of what the games are like. Now about the content I plan on making for God Eater. What I had in mind was a series of guides for every melee weapon, where I don't just go over each weapon's playstyle, but also go more in depth about its moveset, its motion values and how to build for it. A bit like Gaijin Hunter's MHGU guides, if you're familiar. I'd like to go in detail about every kind of motion value for every attack, such as damage multipliers, stamina consumption and OP generation. I found that there's actually little information out there regarding these things. For example, the Japanese wiki lists either partial or incorrect values, and for God Eater Resurrection in particular there's no info at all, because the wiki just copied the values from God Eater 2, which don't apply to Resurrection. And the English wiki barely has any info to begin with, and it's also a bit all over the place. So what I did is test all the values and mechanics of each weapon type myself and write them down in various spreadsheets, which I plan on publishing alongside the guides for easy access to all the numbers. For now I only have these videos planned for God Eater Resurrection, for one because it's the game with the least info online, but also because it's my favorite and most played out of the 3. Afterwards I'd like to make weapon guides for 2 and 3 as well though, maybe not immediately after, but at some point hopefully. Aside from weapon guides, I might also make some more general gameplay guides regarding specific mechanics, like how elemental damage works or how skills interact with each other, just like what I'm doing with the Borderlands games on my channel. And lastly, I was thinking of making simple gameplay videos, for example perfect clears just for fun. A perfect clear is when you complete a mission without using items and without taking any damage, by the way. Recently I've been grinding a mission called Life Prey at plus 99 difficulty in Resurrection, in which you fight an Aragami called Diospita, which is pretty much the series' main flagship monster. I wanted to get a perfect clear on plus 99 difficulty with every melee weapon type, obviously without using guns. I tried to go for some good kill times as well, which took way more time to achieve than I anticipated. Since I play on PC, this is unfortunately a bit harder to pull off due to various bugs that came with the 60 FPS versions of Resurrection and Rage Burst. I already mentioned the shorter Just Guard windows, but aside from that, another huge factor is that at plus 99 difficulty, enemies can no longer be knocked down. Or rather, once you do knock them down, they immediately stand up again, so it's a huge DPS loss. It was quite a pain to finish, but I think it'll make for a really cool video, and it would also be a good reference for my weapon guides to show some proper endgame gameplay. So if I ever feel like torturing myself like that again, I might make more such videos for other missions or the other games, also depending on whether there's a viewer interest for it or not. Anyway, that's all for this video. I hope this was interesting to you, perhaps you're considering playing God Eater yourself, in which case it's a definite recommendation from me. And hopefully you're also excited for the content I plan on making, but if not, there's still gonna be plenty of Borderlands on this channel, of course. As always, thanks for watching and see ya everyone.